foundation for what was later to become the Ottoman Empire. As far as historians were concerned, the blossoming of Constantinople was the beginning of long-distance communication in this part of the world. But 500 miles from the capital, in the stark tundra of Turkey's Anatolian steppe, one of the world's oldest cities has something new to reveal. Çatalhöyük dates from the dawn of human civilization. It's the earliest city ever discovered, the first evidence of people living in a large, settled group. Here, 9,000 years ago, there were streets and houses with decorated walls and ornaments. A team from England's Cambridge University is slowly uncovering the city. For archaeologist Shahina Farid, this evidence of community living is a turning point in human history.
As a Neolithic site, the characteristics of Çatalhöyük is that it's one of the earliest sites when people settled down after a hunting-gathering type livelihood. And they settled down in one place, started building houses and taking advantage of their environment.
The city was supported by farming, and its people enjoyed a period of stability lasting many centuries. And they weren't just scraping a living. Skeletons buried beneath the houses revealed that these ancient city dwellers were well-nourished and healthy, apparently prosperous.
The community at Çatalhöyük appeared to have done very well at this particular site. The site was populated and lived in for over 1,000 years, and if things hadn't been working for them, they would certainly have moved on. So something was obviously keeping them at this particular spot.
So what was the key to their success? How did they manage the transition from nomadic life at a time when other groups had failed? As they considered this question, archaeologists at the site began to discover something unusual. Hidden in walls and floors, they found caches of a remarkable substance. It was obsidian, a natural volcanic glass. The people of Çatal must have brought it from the now dormant volcanoes of the nearby Cappadocia mountain range. Extremely hard and sharp, obsidian was a precious commodity, a perfect material for making arrows, knives, and even mirrors. The hidden caches of obsidian contained more than anyone could require for their own use. It looked as if the Çatal people were dealing in obsidian. But who were they trading with? Dr. James Blackman works in a nuclear laboratory, but he is in fact an archaeologist with a special interest in obsidian.
Archaeologically, obsidian is important because it was extensively traded throughout the ancient Near East, and it can be used to trace exchange networks.
There are only a limited number of sources for obsidian in the world. The people of Çatal had access to one of them. Yet in the last few years, archaeologists have been finding early obsidian artifacts in the Yemen and Iran, where no natural source exists. So where did that obsidian come from?
I use chemistry of the material to trace the trade. The first thing you need to do is to have samples of obsidian. Once you've established the chemistry of the geological sources, you can then match the chemistry of the artifacts found in the various archaeological sites.
And this is where the nuclear reactor comes in. Samples from all over the Middle East come to this laboratory where Dr. Blackman prepares them for chemical analysis. The samples are treated and passed into the nuclear reactor to be irradiated. The irradiated obsidian then begins to give off radioactive gamma rays that can be recorded and analyzed to give a chemical fingerprint for each sample. All samples from a particular source will share the same fingerprint. These chemical signatures allow Dr. Blackman to compare foreign samples with obsidian from Turkey. The results showed that the artifacts from Yemen and Iran could only have come from Turkish volcanoes.
The central Anatolian Turkish sources have been found as far south as the Levant and along the Euphrates River, and as far east as central Iran at a site called Tepe Yahya in south central Iran.
Around volcanoes close to Çatalhöyük, there's clear evidence that obsidian had been extracted and worked. It seems that the Çatal people were processing obsidian and sending it on the first leg of a lengthy trade route. Perhaps this control over a popular commodity had accounted for their prosperity. These were the very earliest human settlements, and already a trade network was reaching out beyond the immediate area. Historians had thought of the Silk Road as the earliest Asian trade route, but the Çatalhöyük evidence totally overturned that idea. For the obsidian traders were plying parts of the very same route 7,000 years earlier. It was a revelation, and there were more to come. In the Indus Valley, in modern-day Pakistan and northern India, lie the remains of the world's largest prehistoric civilization. More extensive than that of ancient Egypt, more sophisticated than anything that came before and much that came after, the Indus Valley cities reached their peak about 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years after Çatalhöyük was built. For the past 10 years, Dr. Mark Kinawa has been studying the Indus Valley site at Harappa. Excavations here have revealed a large, solidly built city. Its brick houses, complete with bathrooms and water systems, displaying technology not seen again until Rome 2,000 years later. This was a typical, prosperous, peaceful Indus Valley city, part of a pattern of closely linked settlements.
The only way to really understand how they were integrated is through looking at their technologies, because the technologies were key to the movement across the Indus Valley and also the integration of those cultures.
In his work at the site, Mark Kinawa has built up a picture of a skilled and sophisticated people. They used a standardized system of weights and measures, and a writing system, one of the first, to tally their goods. It all pointed to trade, yet the Harappans predated the supposed start of the Silk Road by 2,000 years. The key to Dr. Kinawa's latest research lies with these tiny stone beads. They are found throughout the Indus Valley, and similar ones have been found much further afield. Mark Kinawa began to work on ways of identifying the origin of the beads. For him, the key lay in the technology used to make them. In his laboratory in the US, he has built a replica of an ancient drill.
This technique that I'm using here is based on a technique developed in the Indus Valley civilization, so around 2600 BC. The technique that I'm using here is using water to try to help cool the bead as it's being drilled. This keeps it from cracking, and it also cools the drill itself because the drill, it gets very hot. It also washes out the ground up bead material that you're drilling out of this bead. One of the distinguishing features of beads is their technology in which they're made. So by comparing technologies, we can determine that beads that look the same are actually made in different places. And this is the result of looking at their drill holes and looking at specific aspects of the techniques used to manufacture them.
Kinowa has learnt that drills are specific to certain areas and that each type leaves a different set of minute marks on the bead, a kind of trademark identifying where the bead was made. But these tiny marks are on the inside of the bead, and so he fills the beads with a gel that takes a precise impression. The gel impressions provide a unique record of the hundreds of beads Kinowa has gathered from sites across the globe. And under a powerful microscope, Dr. Kinowa can determine precisely where each bead was made. And he's discovered that Harappan beads have been turning up in some very surprising places.
By comparing the inside of the bead, meaning the drill hole, and the measurements and all of the specifics of it, it's possible now to confirm that beads made in the Indus Valley were going to Mesopotamia, they were going to Central Asia, and most recently I'm finding that there might be beads in China. Finding beads from the Indus Valley in China during the Western Zhou period, probably around 1200 to 800 BC. This is Shang and Western Zhou. And it's very important. It means that there's much wider overlapping trade networks in the ancient period than anyone had ever imagined.
The Turkish obsidian findings had shown that there was trade across parts of Asia 9,000 years ago. But the Harappan bead evidence proves that by 4,000 years ago, there was trade right across Asia, 2,000 years before the Silk Road had begun. It looks as if the history books had it wrong, and that moreover, trade contacts had been part and parcel of the growth of ancient civilizations. It's a breakthrough in our knowledge of Asian history, and to Mark Kinowa, it makes perfect sense.
The emergence of early civilizations could not have occurred without trade. You cannot develop a complex society without connections to distant areas. Trade is key to bringing materials in from distant areas that are not accessible to everyone in a society. The emergence of hierarchical society, different classes of society, is based on some people getting certain materials and other people not getting it. So trade is essential for helping to create hierarchy and differences within a society.
Evidence was mounting to show that established trading links must have existed from earliest times. But many historians still held to the idea that only the goods had moved along the chain. The people and their cultures stayed separate. The next breakthrough was to come from a desolate area very near to where those tiny Harappan beads ended their journey, in Xinjiang province, China. This is the Taklamakan Desert in the westernmost part of China, a vast desert of sand and stone rimmed by impassable mountains. To the south are the slopes of the Himalayas and Tibet. To the north, the frozen wastes of Mongolia and the Gobi Desert. Taklamakan is hardly welcoming, frozen in winter and burning in summer. Yet cities such as Zhaohuo, Subashu and Lulan, now ruins in the sand, once bustled with life. For these were the staging posts in the Silk Road, stopovers where traders took refuge and exchanged their goods. When the silk traders crossed the Taklamakan, they linked the people and cultures of East and West for the first time, or so historians had thought. But on the edge of the Taklamakan, tucked away in a little visited Tarim Basin Museum, was a discovery that would change all of that. Mummies, Not the deliberately prepared mummies of Egyptian fame, but ancient corpses, naturally preserved by the dehydrating desert climate. Such mummies are not uncommon in desert areas, but these were so unexpected they sent shock waves through the archaeological world. Their features reflect not the Asian people who inhabit this continent today, but a completely different physical type. Some of these bodies are more than 6 feet tall, much taller than the norm for the local Chinese population. Their desiccated remains reveal wisps of blonde hair, high cheekbones, long prominent noses, and round, deep-set eyes. None of these is characteristic of Asian peoples. They are typically Caucasian. It looked as if these were visitors from outside, travelers who had died thousands of miles from their original home. The mummies provoked a whole raft of questions. Why were these people so different to today's Asian population? Who were they, and where had they come from? There was one clue. The mummies were dressed in colorful clothing and wrapped in cloth. Irene Good is a textiles expert from Harvard University. She was invited by the Chinese authorities to take fabric samples for analysis. In her laboratory, she carried out a meticulous examination. First, she looked at the designs, patterns, and weaving techniques, comparing them with those known to have been used throughout history by different cultures.
I was seeing design styles and motifs that were actually influences from areas that we think of as quite divergent and far away, namely these tartans or plaids that may have appeared to be what we are familiar with from Iron Age Europe, Northern Europe.
Then she moved on to the fibers themselves.